All right, let's start off by getting some feedback and some input on what should we talk about today? What are the things that you are interested in? And we'll find a brave volunteer to go first, and we'll just go around the room and say who you are, where you're from, and something you'd like to say or learn about rubrics.
I can start.
All right,
Let's start somewhere. Hi, my name is Tim Dolby. I work in the program for English as a second language. Why am I here? Because I'm using rubrics in Canvas, and I'm sure there's a lot of things that I'm not doing. So I'd like to know what those things are.
what am I not doing? Good. All right. Volunteer next to them.
My name is David McIntyre from LS Learning Support Services. I am here because I'm helping a faculty member design a multimedia assignment that's integrated across a semester. And just the last piece is the assessment evaluation of rubric. I think it'd be really helpful.
Okay, making it easier assessment.
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Tom. I'm Tom Weisgarber. I'm a new instructor in the physics department. And so this is the first time I'm using Canvas or actually teaching at UW. So
Welcome on both counts.
thank you. And I just came to figure out what, more information about it.
More about Canvas. Very good. All right.
My name is Laura Lang, and I'm in the School of Education, and I teach both in-person and online courses. And so I've kind of dabbled in using the rubrics, but
Okay.
I'm interested in learning more.
I'm gonna put that down as paper versus electronic or versus digital.
My name is Erwin Laris. I work for LSS also. I am the Learning Technology Consultant, TA for LSS. And I'm here to share some of the things I do with rubrics and to hear what everybody else does with them.
So Erwin is also leading a session that is ostensibly for letters and sciences TAs, but I hear that it's open to everyone. It's just that you don't get follow-up support afterwards. Who was telling me that yesterday? Somebody was telling me that yesterday at my teaching. Was up here. Who? It was Steele. Steele showed up, yes. So we've got a handout here if you want to learn more. I'm told that they'll election in the room, so that's good. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Sarah Hagan. I'm an instructional technology consultant in Sept in Technology Engineering. And I'm going to talk about the new rubric importer. Very exciting. And also coming up, I think maybe next week, will be non-scoring rubrics. And eventually, far off in the distance, there's also the ability to tie rubrics into outcomes and APHIS kind of stuff, which will be eventually AEFIS.
My name's Cliff Cunningham. I work with Do It. I actually work with John and James and Megan, and I do a lot of the training. So for me, I'm always interested in how you guys actually use rubrics, and maybe even more to my point from a support standpoint is where do the current Canvas rubrics fall short? What are the functionality gaps that I just need to be mindful of? Some people start asking questions. I appreciate or anticipate really might be frustrating.
I'm Lauren Rosen. I direct a language program for UW System, and they're just moving to Canvas. I do a lot of language teacher development, and this summer I taught an online course to language teachers using Canvas. And I loved the rubrics, but I also found some weird, quirky stuff about how they worked. So I'll be curious to see if other people find it weird and quirky, or if it's just me, which is entirely possible.
My name is Tom Bryan. I'm an instructor in the Nelson Institute and in UW Housing, and I mainly use rubrics to make the speed grader better. And I'm in Tim's camp. What am I not doing that I could be doing? And I already figured one out, and it is awesome. So the saving comments for later, yeah. Yeah, what could I be doing more and better? More better.
I'm Shanna Crowther. I'm in the English program with Tim, and I'm currently converting rubrics for a class from paper to Canvas, and it took me like 2 hours to figure out how to do holistic ones. I'm so embarrassed that I didn't just ask someone, and now they're really easy. But so I feel like there are other things that are probably really, really easy. I just want you to tell me what they are.
All of them.
Yeah, just tell me all the easy stuff.
I'm Heidi, I'm from biomolecular chemistry, and I am also in this camp with several other people. It's like I feel like I'm underutilizing rubrics at the moment because there's probably a lot of things that I could do that I'm not.
I'm Ryan Martinez. I'm an instructional designer with Ski Division of OP System, and we're again currently migrating all of our courses over to Canvas. So I'm trying to examine rubrics to see how we can try to streamline some of the grading for some of the faculty.
James McKay, I work with on UWT, mainly here to kind of see what uses, how people are using rubrics.
Hi, everybody. I know some of you, but not all. I'm Brad Hughes. I'm the director of the university's Writing Center, also the director of a program called Writing Across the Curriculum, which works with faculty and instructional staff and TAs from across campus to think about smart, creative, effective, efficient ways to teach with writing. And John asked me to come today to talk a little bit about more bigger, broader pedagogical issues about designing effective rubrics that align with the learning goals of science. So not about the technical side of that within Canvas. So I say we'll get to those things later.
Hey everybody, I'm Mike Kane. I work closely with Brad in the Writing Across the Curriculum program. I'm the assistant director in that program. The reason I'm here is because I'm sort of developing a workshop on using Canvas to respond to student writing. So trying to come up with ideas for that. And also just in terms of what I'm interested in learning about here today, particularly discussion rubrics and sort of examples of those. And then also, I find this interesting on the backside, kind of aligning outcomes with the rubric.
While there's a break, may I ask if we can bring these tables forward a bit, just to open up those chairs back behind you, just in case we get more.
You're gonna have to do that, bring a buddy slide.
I know.
There's
You know,
no more
thank you,
room
guys.
for buddies.
Or we'll get your room. All right, so there are several things that we've got as sort of requests. I don't know if we'll be able to cover all of them, but if, as the discussion continues and ensues, if you have an opportunity to say, oh, speaking of paper versus digital, then let's check these things off our list. At least, hopefully everybody will leave with something that they didn't know already that's useful for them. And it's also one of the fun things about this, doing the labs, is that I can start making connections like, Mike, you might be interested in that workshop that Aaron is giving. And, right, so, and everybody will benefit from that, so we're not all reinventing the wheel over and over ourselves. So that's kind of a fun element of it. And John, we got some space in the corner where you sit here. All right, so how many of you have already used rubrics a little bit, opened them up, played with them a little bit? What are some general thoughts? What do you like about them?
Easy grading.
Speed grader connection. If you have not already used a rubric in the speed grader, it changes things and it makes you want to have rubrics for all of your assignments because, yes.
And not just for me, also for when we use the peer review function, it's easy for other students to provide meaningful feedback to others.
Yes. So rubrics help the instructor grade faster, help the peers see what their peers are doing, give them each other feedback, help students see on their own, do some self-assessment because they've got that criteria clearly defined in front of them. Any drawbacks to that system? Have any of you used rubrics and seen that students use it as a checkbox, like, did I include 3 references? Check, 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 good, I don't have to include a 4th one, right? I don't have to go above this because I've got all 4 points in that category, so that's it. Sarah?
Sometimes students run into trouble because if they're working on a rubric and then they close it, they can't get back into it to do the peer review, so they have to make sure they complete their peer review with a rubric in one single step.
Awesome, and we have in November a whole session talking about peer review, so I imagine that this topic will come up again there, but that's a good thing to know if you're using peer review. That's not true for instructors, right? If we start making things, comments, we can close it, come back to it, and what we did is already there. So, good for us. All right. Other downsides or drawbacks to rubrics that we've seen in Canvas, or rubrics in general? How long did it take you to enter all of the rubrics?
A holistic one. I mean, and I already had a holistic rubric set up with detailed comments, but just, you know, and then once I figured it out, I felt so stupid. Yeah, but I still had a hard time because our current system is like, 35 to 46 is this grade, and now, and then 32 to 34 is this grade, but in this it's like 32 to 35 or less than 35, and if you, I'm probably not explaining this, but if you input the second grade and you choose the higher number, it automatically changes the lower number of the
Yes. Yes, I know what you mean.
range.
As you're setting up the rubric,
The
the
range.
numbers will change
Right.
based on the numbers that you put
So
in.
then I had to go back and, think about what numbers I actually really wanted to have for the high ranges and the low
Setup's not
ranges.
pretty. The setup's not pretty.
Right.
In maybe this is not an understanding, my optimistic hope is that the rubric tool will get better. Did I hear some? That's
in general,
optimistic hope, okay.
that's in general, a good outlook on all things.
Climate, it'll get better.
And here's the thing about the technology, I think to your point of what you build into Canvas in those rubrics, sometimes it's better to start off with the analog version or with the Google Sheets version or the Excel version, because anytime that you make it in Canvas, if you then go in and try to adjust it, have any of you tried to edit rubrics? Good experience, lovely.
Oh, smell of roses, walking in the park, yeah.
It's kind of clunky is what I'm hearing from you. It's clunky, and I think that this is why the rubric importer is kind of a really cool upgrade. Sarah, do you wanna?
Yeah, do you
Talk
want
about
to drive and I'll just talk you
I'll
through it?
drive, sure. Should I start with the
So,
KB doc?
Yeah, if you start at the KB doc, which is called Canvas Rubric Importer, so if you just Google Canvas Rubric Importer KB.
And there's a link on your sheet as well.
There is a big yellow disclaimer at the top there because this is based on a script written by James Jones at Richland Community College in Illinois, who generously shares a lot of his work in the Canvas community. And so what this is kind of custom JavaScript that we've added to our Canvas instance. If you had known about that fix, you might have been running a Tamper Monkey script that lets you do this. You don't need this Tamper Monkey script anymore because we've added it to UW-Madison's instance for everyone. So I don't know about the system folks, you might want to.
I would like to get a hold of that script because I'm
So-
sure it's not there.
Yeah.
If you're in the Canvas community, follow James Jones, because
James Jones.
he's got all kinds of cool stuff. James Jones.
Do not accept too much advertising.
And a lot of those things are not UW supported tools until they go through our process, so big disclaimer also.
So on this page, you have the directions for using the importer. That second link to sample rubrics will bring up a Google Doc that shows the types of rubrics you can create. This isn't going to give you the ranged ones. It'll just give you those basic types, and then you can go in and add those ranges if you want them. So what it does, if you type in something that looks like that in Google Sheets, then you'll be able to copy and paste it directly into Canvas using the importer. And the first example there, all of the criteria have the same point values, and version 2 there has ones where the values vary. So either type will work. So John, if you just want to copy and paste from criteria down to that.
So I was thinking you were gonna tell us how to get around the uniform font of rubrics. That's not a possibility.
Fonts in Canvas are set by default for accessibility reasons.
And then you can't even have space.
Yeah.
No, okay, sorry.
But you can at least create the rubric really quickly, and then if you decide you want to change something about it, go back, just delete the rubric, change it in the Google Sheet and re-import it. It's a lot faster than trying to fix it in Canvas.
So here
now
I
you
am.
have that copy.
I'm going to copy it.
You can go to any Canvas course, and you can either do the course homepage / rubrics, or you can go to outcomes. And then put the manage rubrics box in the top right corner.
And not import, but manage
Yeah,
rubrics.
we're not importing outcomes from the CSV, nobody's doing that. Use the import rubric button on the rubrics page. Give your rubric a name. And paste your rubric in there and hit create.
The paste looks messy, but.
Yeah, the tab.
But look at that.
And there it is. So then you can add it to an assignment via the usual process.
And it's a lot easier to change these rubrics around and then just re-import them than it is to try to go in here and edit the rubric. I think. Have other people found that as well? Yes.
And then you've got your rubric in Google Sheets where it's easier to collaborate with other instructors. You can add comments, you can switch it up, you can move stuff around, you can make multiple copies. Maybe you have one file with different tabs for each rubric in your course to keep things organized. And that will also make it easier to manage going forward.
Can you go back to the original spreadsheet? Just like how much needs to be, you need to have so the headers need to be just criteria and 1, 2, 3, 4, is that?
So those can be any point values. Those will be your point values.
Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. I see.
And you can have, 1 through 100.
I see.
Is that a good practice, everyone?
But you're not titling that header. You're not titling. So it's one of the criteria.
Oh, like,
So you get a criteria.
successful, you suck.
It's just, that's
You know,
just,
that's-
that's the
Successful up here.
Well, just when you get back to, and I go to the Canvas course, go back to the Canvas course, like what it imports.
Yeah, well, there's this number to the right
Okay,
here.
it just says ratings and points,
Okay.
okay, so there's no heading there above.
Right, because you're heading, here's your criteria.
And the other thing I think is that if we go into edit rubrics, all of these things can have little explanations.
Yeah, you
And-
can add more. You can also import the long description. That's in the second.
Oh, you can, okay.
Yeah.
So let's
Just
do
add
that.
one more column.
And again, these are all on the activity sheet, so you can take these home and play with them as you need. There's a long description.
Oh, and that's how you get the different point values. We're gonna have criteria, different point
Right.
values, you have to add that in the
Number
row.
10,
Okay.
number 5.
Word.
Well, my voice isn't 100%, so I apologize. I had no voice yesterday. But I'm Karen Skeba. I work with Teach Online, faculty learn to teach online, and we have lots of resources. And one of them he's sharing with you is a press book that has lots of information. Couple things I would warn you about: 1 through 4, if you're doing a grading scale, may not be exactly what you want. 3 might be 75% of a grade instead of what you're hoping. It's not A, B, C, and D. So in this press book, it provides a lot of resources, especially the back page. What is a rubric? How to use it? But if you go to the back page of that, it provides a lot of resources on the very last page on how to figure out your grades. Final thoughts, because I see a lot of people who do 1 through 4 and they find out that doesn't really, grading scales and all of that doesn't really go to the grade that you want it to be. And I just emailed you, I'm working with Greg Conniff's group on those template resources, and there's rubric templates that you can just fill in. If you don't want to do that Google Sheet is pretty cool. If you don't want to do that, I just emailed you the new template course that has a lot of templates, including for rubrics that you can just plug in. It has a whole bunch of different ones, 10 points, 4 points, 3 points, all sorts of different points that you can just plug in the information as well. So there's a lot of great
So
resources.
rubric templates are available
In the Canvas templates.
in the Canvas
But I just
template?
emailed you, they renamed it. They're working on directions on how to download it. So I just emailed you the new one that
Okay.
they're working on, and it has I haven't put it in there yet, which I will, because it needs directions on how to download the templates.
Okay.
But there's lots and lots of resources and more rubrics than you could possibly want to deal with. 380,000 public rubrics you can search for. I think that's on your sheet there.
Where to
But
find rubrics?
The best way to write a rubric is to find somebody else, steal it, and change the wording to what you want, because it's really hard to write one from scratch that is effective. So the best way is to steal it from somebody else.
And with 380,000 rubrics, I can guarantee that a lot of those are bad.
Yes.
So the best way to get a bad rubric is to also.
Right, so you have to look at it, exactly, you have to look at it and select it based on your need, but you'll find a lot of good ones as well. But, the ones in the Canvas template course are good examples, and the ones that you have on the Google Sheet are good examples. And there's a lot of resources here on how to write a good rubric as well. And the rubric for rubric is on there, and how to assess the rubric is a good one.
Rubrics is also your first link on your page here. And again, this press book is also available on this page in here as well. Okay, 2 questions over there, comments.
I wanted to add on to what Karen was saying. We don't do this in engineering, but it is possible to add rubrics at the account level. So I could add rubrics to the College of Engineering's account that would then be available for everyone with the course in that account. So if you are using rubrics in a standardized way across programs or courses, that could be something to look into.
Help the learning W team or find your own local Canvas admin.
We set us up through Rubrics.
On your activity sheet, you have instructions on how to get into our Canvas course, where you can get all of these things. And I will add what you sent me in the email to the lab notes, so check tomorrow or next week maybe under lab notes, and those links will be there as well. And hopefully we'll be able to incorporate them into future sessions as well. All right, you guys go ahead.
It's not a question as much as an idea I want to bounce at people here. When I hear creating rubrics is very difficult, I don't share that experience. Every time that I need to create a rubric, I just want to hear what your feedback is on this. Like, for instance, I want to create a rubric for a presentation, and I just sit down and envision what is a perfect presentation, what are the things that this presentation does, and that ends up being the categories in my rubric. And then of all those things, what is the most important? And then just distribute points up to 100, if that's what you want. And then I work backwards from there. And those categories end up being the categories in my rubrics, but that lets me build the skeleton for the prompt that I will provide my students. And it comes out of the rubric. So in that sense, I find it really, I usually don't scour the internet for other people's rubrics. To me, it's easier just to, what is my perfect, this. And those are the elements that
It gets more complicated if you start to build rubrics for multiple means of expression. So in Universal Design for Learning, they encourage rubrics to cover thematic content rather than just, and I don't mean to disparage here, but I remember my first experience with rubrics were things like for presentations, where it was very specific to the presentation, spoke clearly, and I was always bad at that one, and was organized, bad at that one, things like that, but less about the content. It was often about the format. So there are often these administrative things like, use 12 point Times New Roman font and things like that. And if you don't do that, you get taken off on that. In Universal Design for Learning, if you're going to offer multiple ways for the students to express their mastery, you might say, all right, this paper rubric that I've been using about how to create a paper may not apply if somebody wants to do a video. So how do I make these categories broad enough to say, all right, did they share 3 examples of whatever the content is? Did they communicate it clearly rather than via some way that they communicated it clearly? And that, I think, gets a little bit more difficult to come up with these really sort of holistic, not using the same holistic type here, but broader categories. Does anyone have any thoughts or experience in doing that? And
I do,
ideas?
I do, and I would say that one of the challenges when you first use a rubric, that you've created a new one, is also trying to figure out ahead of time how the weighting of the competency should happen. So, right, because as a writing teacher for many years, mechanics to me are weighted at a much lower level than our development of ideas and construction of ideas. So I think that's one of the most challenging pieces, is honing in what are the truly essential pieces of student learning that I want to most capture within these rubrics. There's a great resource, if anybody hasn't read it yet, called Rethinking Rubrics by Maya Wilson, who talks about raises some critiques of rubrics as they have been traditionally used, in which they can kind of foreground maybe student outcomes that we don't necessarily want. Oh, you have that. Perfect. Yeah. It's a great
The
book.
internet.
It's a great book. Yeah. It's just a really nice way of getting to help me think of what really truly is the purpose of these, and to what extent are they really conveying what I most value about this work to students as they're working on the assignment.
And that gets to your point about what are the most important parts that you just sort of.
And you manifest those
Yeah,
points,
yeah,
right?
exactly, yeah.
And then they get a clear idea. And I totally agree with what you said. The more you abstract, the more generic it is. But you look at it from the point of view of the student, the more generic you are, the less helpful you're being to them. So it's always this balancing, act that you have to do.
That's the next point.
It's in stock.
So good. Yeah. Very good. What's that vibe up? Yeah. Other thoughts on writing rubrics?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, one thing that I dislike about rubrics is that it seems to cluster grades. Like after I'm done grading, I look at it and everybody is, 63 or everybody is 44 because of the way, most people do like a good job, so they're all going to end up in that category. And when you put all the math, you do all the math together, it seems like if you plot it, they're going to be, it's not as nice about.
Are you talking specifically about Canvas?
Uh,
or about rubrics?
Rubrics in general.
Okay.
And that's because they all see that they need to do these things.
Right.
So they all meet the expectations because they know what expectations they are to meet. And I think that oftentimes in our classes without rubrics, they're guessing at what our expectations are. And so some of them guess well and some of them don't guess well. So yes, how does that mess with our grade distribution if that's important? Brad, you have thoughts about writing? Can I have things out for you?
Yeah, just this one, if you don't mind. Great. So just want to share a few things from research and theory about this within writing studies. And it matches or aligns with what many of you have been saying. So this handout that you're about to get on ivory colored paper from the university's Writing Across the Curriculum program. We do lots of workshops with TAs and instructional staff and faculty across campus and all kinds of different disciplines, and are often asked, what's some advice about the process of creating evaluation criteria? I actually like that term better than a rubric because people think of these rigid forms with rubrics. And I think the first step is just what you described. What do you value in a student's response to a particular assignment, and what's most important? So there's some advice here about how to go about that, and if you look at the numbered list on the first page, it very much aligns with what you described as your process there. You sort of ask, what really matters in this assignment? What characterizes a successful piece of work? What kind of variation am I open to? How could I define success in different kinds of ways? Because one of the criticisms or complaints is that the more specific rubrics get, the more you may be constraining the approaches that students take, or limiting creativity, or alternative ways of thinking about something. So there's some advice there. I want to look as a group at a sample in just a second. But in those top paragraphs, that kind of prefatory material, I really want to stress that the third paragraph there, although rubrics are beneficial for instructors, as we've been talking about, and students as well, and I really believe that students need to know what characterizes successful work in response to assignments. And we all know that they bring into our classrooms the legacy of previous instruction. Different instructors value different things. Students have different ways of complaining about that. To us, when they arrive in our courses, students need to know what we value. We need to communicate that. But we've got to be honest about the drawbacks of rubrics. They imply a kind of precision that doesn't really exist. I've got to push on that idea. And every key term in a rubric requires interpretation. Those of you in the social sciences, you have to operationalize those terms and stuff. So if you want original ideas in a paper, what is an original idea? And it's a very situated kind of thing. So what's an original idea in a philosophy course for juniors about contemporary moral issues? So an instructor in that department giving students a rubric for an argument paper about a contemporary moral issue explains it. She unpacks what she means by this seemingly clear term of an original idea. She says, I don't expect you to have an idea that no philosopher has ever had before, nor do I think that that's impossible. I'm open to that, but what I want is you not just to parrot back what I've said in class. Do you see what I mean? So these terms have this illusion of clarity and precision. And for a student who doesn't already know what those mean, and it's also situational for the level of the course. So what a sophisticated central claim or thesis or interpretation of an historical event or whatever is different at different levels of courses and so on. So I'm really opposed to big, broad, generic rubrics. They're close to meaningless. They don't apply very well to specific assignments in disciplines. It also has to be aligned with a genre, different genres of writing. So a critique in a social science research course is very different from an argument paper in a philosophy course. And what's valued there is very different. So if you want to do a big, broad, universal, generic kind of thing about that, it becomes very meaningless. It meets the expectations of the assignment. So then you've got to clarify what those are. So I like to push on some of these concepts. And then I'd just be interested if you take a look at the sample that's on pages 2 and 3. It comes from a great book about designing writing assignments and responding to student writing by John Bean at the University of Seattle called Engaging Ideas. UW-Madison's library has this available electronically, so it's my favorite kind of resource. You can look at it in a coffee shop or at home. And here's an example of the evaluation criteria for a history paper and a first-year history seminar. It's a really interesting assignment if you take a look at it. It actually uses a comment from an emeritus professor in the history department here, an expert on Latin American history, to get students to react to that idea. But look at the way that rubric is structured. So it's about the introduction and central claim or thesis statement, the quality of ideas and argument. So I always believe in starting with ideas, argument, content. That matters most. Start with that. Then move toward things that are necessary but not sufficient. And that's what you see later in that rubric. And then it's your choice about how you want to structure it. There's all kinds of different ways, as you know, all kinds of scales. Part of what I like here is that it doesn't have just one absolute number in that middle column. Because anybody who's graded a lot of work or is worried about everything clustering around the same number in the end recognizes that there's different degrees of success even in that middle column. So that's part of what I like here. But that's enough on the soapbox about that. But just want to share.
And one of the ways to have this original idea so that the students don't all provide the same things. To ask them to have, what is their, one, their interpretation, but two, how does it apply to their lives? Or how can it apply to their lives? And that's sort of one really nice way to provide these multiple means of expression, because they have to take it and they have to say, what does this mean to me? Rather than parroting back what it means according to the paragraph that they read.
If that's what you want in your assignment, and there are many faculty who don't want to hear how it applies to students' lives, and they want them writing about things beyond their lives. And so, yeah.
So can I address something about the rubric that you're showing? And I would love to hear what people think. I intensely dislike a scale that is that far out, from 0 through 10.
Yeah.
In my experience.
So don't use it.
Right, right. I will, like, I love 1, 2, and 3, but I don't use it. Usually 1 through 5. But my problem with this, and I would like to hear your feedback, is like when I'm tired and I'm going through my, and then it's like, it's good, but it's gonna be an 8. And then the next one, I get up in the morning and having my coffee and I give him a 10.
Yeah.
And when I'm grading, something that I think has to be premised is that a work that equal quality should get the same grade. And I find that the more discrete these elements are, that is basically impossible.
Yeah. Good point. There, and so one last thing I forgot to say is that I also think it's so important, if you're talking about papers, there can be rubrics for evaluating other kinds of things, of course. But if it's a paper, I so believe that we remember that papers are part of a conversation, and that students deserve free-form, written feedback on their ideas and their arguments. We've all benefited from professors giving us free-form sentences, prose feedback on our ideas and on arguments and so on. So, numbers off a rubric, or things circled off a rubric, or traits off a rubric are not enough, especially with more substantial papers. Maybe with a really brief, low-stakes kind of assignment, that's plenty. And a plus, a check, a minus, 1, 2, 3, overall kind of thing. But for a substantial paper that involves a lot of research, and some students deserve and need to learn, us to take a turn in a dialogue with them and to think about they've taken an extended turn in that paper. So I love conceptualizing it as a conversation or a dialogue. So there needs to be an open space for writing written feedback about really liked X and Y, and but I wasn't convinced by Z, or you might want to think about these additional questions or whatever. And just remembering that no rigid, limited number feedback or checking boxes or whatever is all that students need in order to think more deeply about complex subjects, raise new questions, and so on. So I always like to stress that think of it as a conversation, and we need to take a turn in that conversation when we respond.
Can I just ask a quick practical question about this example rubric here?
Yeah.
Because I noticed that one of them, they say you can't stuffle is from 0 to 20 instead of 0 to 10. So if there really is a particular line there, or in a rubric that you feel is a lot more important, is it then better to have one question that is just way more, or is it better to split that into 2 different questions?
That's a great question. Anybody have a feeling? I don't pretend to be the absolute expert on it. If something's more important, should you just have more numbers? It's worth 30 points total or maximum on that particular criterion or that particular row, or should you split? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
or should you split that into 3 different 10 things?
Can you give an example of what you mean by more important?
Well, I was actually using this example here, where they said, for example, the quality of the ideas.
I would make that worth more than 10.
Introduction to
Yeah.
sustainment.
Yeah, I would make that worth more than 10.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
But then would you, because conversely, you could also say you could split it into the qualities of the ideas and the qualities of the argument.
So it's a trade-off right there, because you want to make more discrete judgments about all 3 of those things there. I just say quality of ideas and argument is the most important single things in that particular paper, so I make that 30 notes.
And it provides a strong signal to the students too, that, okay,
To work
all
harder
your
on that
ideas,
part
that's
of it.
the most
Yeah.
important part.
It's a great question.
And because I just feel like in some cases, I might have a student with a lot of good ideas, but they're just not that good at arguing about them.
Yeah.
Right.
this is a way to signal that to them. And so,
Another
then you
thing
should
that
have
we've
a
heard already
quality of
is start with the most important ones at the top, because we tend to start at the top and work our way down. So if we focus first on the most important things, even if they're all worth the same points, if it's so important, more important, lead with that.
And this is where I struggle and would love some feedback on it is, I also tend to, you know, if I'm looking at my whole class, there are some students that are more creative, for example, but less able to write. You know, so I want the student who's creative to also get a boost for the efforts in what they're good at. And so I tend to not want to separate and say this criteria is going to be more important than that criteria, because then I'm not differentiating for
different kinds of talents.
different kinds of student styles, abilities.
Yeah, you really get philosophical kinds of
So,
issues
right.
as well as pedagogical ones. So that's what I love about these discussions.
Oh, I wanted to get the sense of the room. For instance, once I moved to Canvas rubrics, I was used to using a standard scale for any category, any task that I was rating. I like the excellent is 5 and very good is 4 and meets blah blah is 3, poor and awful is 1, right? And then in Canvas, you cannot do that. You have to assign actual points. How do you guys feel about, I feel like one is more elegant than the other. Do you know what I mean?
One of the things that if Beth Martin were here in pharmacy, she would talk about how she uses a hundredth of a point for the difference between, there's like 4 and 4.001. And 4.001 is like outstanding and 4 is excellent. And as far as grades go, it's not that big of a difference, but it's just kind of an extra pat on the back for the students to know that they didn't just get this, but they impressed her with that extra 0.00 whatever number of points. So it's a whole other category, but it's like you're on the high end of the category, you've exceeded expectations. And that, there's a lot of students that are point counters, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that's a huge part of the game of school. But there's also something about that intrinsic, like, you really impressed me here. I'm not gonna show it in the grade because you did well, you're already at the top thing, but there's an extra little boost. Sarah and Tom.
Starting next month, it's available in beta right now if you want to play with it, but the ability to remove the points entirely from the rubric will exist. So they're called non-scoring rubrics. There's documentation already in community for that, and it will be in our instance soon. It's just when you go to edit the rubric that you've attached to assignment with a little pencil where you're used to checking the box that says, yes, I do want this to go to the grade book. You can equally not have that go to the grade book and just remove the points from the rubric entirely. Then you can provide the feedback and enter a grade or not, depending on what type of assignment it is. But just divorcing those points entirely from the ratings.
And what are some advantages of that? What are use cases of that?
I don't know, but I have a thought about the problem that I have, which is that I think what the instructor values with the assignment that I'm helping him with is that it contributes to the process of practice and adaptation of their writing in a new medium. And so it's not so important that they are technically excellent, but that they like engage in like a fun discourse. So where do rubrics fit into like self-assessment and some of the things that are not really cognitive exactly, but like, how are you connecting this to the process of learning? And how do you self-assess how you think you're doing? Is that?
So rather than you got X number of points because you did a great job at it, you get X number of points because you participated fully.
Yes,
almost.
Yes. That you were actively listening to your partner in group session, or like you had like an interesting question. That's not the work product exactly, but it sort of is part of the integrated experience that the work how it ties to this overall goal.
So I think that along with what Sarah said, actually has a really, depending on how this is gonna work, interesting connotation in that ultimately you wanna test or assess the same way you're teaching. So if you're giving students sort of that process of practicing what you're gonna eventually have a bigger assessment on, you could also attach a rubric to it. They could see exactly where their strengths and weaknesses are in the rubric without that being the grade.
Okay.
And then use the exact same rubric with points for the bigger assessment.
I see what you're saying.
So kind of a growth, if it can be done where you can have points attached to it or not in the exact same rubric and just choose which way you want it, depending on in which moment you're using it.
I think that could work. That could work.
It reminds me also of sort of the value of the rubric in peer review, where this other students
That's
can
correct.
give them feedback on this, whatever points they're not grading, they're providing you feedback so that you can take that into account as you grade. But in some ways, that's the point values are a little bit less important for them. And then, I guess to your point of how much feedback do they need, they can get some from their peers of assorted levels of value.
Right.
And then again, it's up to the instructors to sort of highlight which are the more important ones and less important ones.
And you can comment specifically, if you set it up to, you can comment specifically on the criteria, so you can explain to a student while they're going through that process of why they didn't do as well on this particular criteria.
I'm gonna put out a very different idea. So my colleague and I do a lot of work around supporting K-12 teachers.
Yep.
And when we teach courses around that topic, we think it's also very important for us to model what we preach. So we use with a particular it's very hard though. It's been even hard for me. I mean, I've been working with my colleague who's been mentoring me. So we use this instructional framework that we use with K-12 teachers and helping them support. And we use that with our students, our graduate students. And it includes a rubric, but the rubric is intended to be formative and not evaluative. So what we do is we give students, and it takes a while for students to understand this and not attach a percentage to it, but we have 3 core categories that actually all of our assignments address. So that they are broader, but we talk about how they apply to the existing, assignment that they're working on. And we do give them scores on those 3, but those do not translate to a grade. So our actual grade is holistic. The intention being that we're giving them feedback on 3 core categories of learning that we want them to be developing through the course. And the students, it takes them a while, but they kind of finally say, okay, I get it. I get it, because just because I got a 1 out of 3 in this particular criteria doesn't mean I failed. It means that was an area that I didn't address fully enough. And it's a learning experience. And again, there's some students who just can't divorce the points from, we actually changed the scale this year, so they wouldn't immediately be able to convert it into a percentage, because some students do anyway. But it's been a fun experiment. I'm not sure, I haven't done it in the online setting, because I think it requires so much more explanation and support and discussion, and I would love to have someone help me figure out how to do that in the online session, because it feels so much better for me it's also a graduate level course, so I don't have to score in the same ways that I think some bigger undergraduate courses and instructors do, so I recognize that.
I actually had one thing, one of the first support calls that I was brought in on involved rubrics, involved a guy in physics. I'll talk to you about it. And, but it was quirkiness that was interesting to know. So could you go into the edit mode of this rubric?
You probably want to attach it to an assignment.
Oh, maybe attached to an assignment, yeah.
You want the boxes at the bottom?
The box at the bottom, yeah. So if there's any chance you can jump into an assignment and attach it to an assignment, or and really any rubric, it would be fine, or just grab one if it's not an assignment rule. start in this, or
I
not a rubric.
have no idea whether it matches.
That's good, case study.
Yeah. Alright.
You just make a new assignment.
Yeah, just make a new assignment.
Yeah.
Because there's a checkbox that's, that had given this guy grief, yeah, just junk it up and save it out.
45. All right, good, sure. Nope. Yep. Okay.
There you go. So this is where you go to, and of course, you probably know this is where you go to attach. You have to save it out, and you hit the button here to attach or to go build a rubric. If you want to build it from scratch, you go ahead and hit the button. You can do build one from scratch, or you can go find it. Don't do the find. It's these check boxes down here that I'm most interested in. But the assumption is that your rubric needs to match the values of your assignment, and that totally makes sense. But the question that came up was that the faculty member wanted to use the rubric, punch in numbers, and then have the tabulated numbers feed back to the grade book. Right? Kind of makes sense, right? That's the whole point of having a rubric, I thought. But you have to turn on this checkbox. Use this rubric for assignment grading. And he didn't know that, and he'd already gotten into it and started grading. And once you started grading, you can't undo it. So now he had to go through, use the rubric, punch in all the numbers, and he had to go add them all up and then go key in the value when he was actually doing the grading. So I actually got online on the Canvas community and I banged out a question like, why isn't that at least defaulted? Because that's like what everybody does, right? And I got a little bit of pushback saying, no, there were lots of scenarios where people would not want to automatically assume this, and it sounds like this is the scenario where they just want to use it to provide some feedback, but I want to go give my own score. I don't want to feel bound by this, or I don't. Of course, another funny thing is, if you make an assignment worth 5 points in the grade book, you can give them 25 points if you want to. You can give whatever numeric value you want to an assignment. So even if you let this auto calculate a grade, you can still fudge the grade, but they just said they don't want to do that. So that was going to be my one point, was just if you intend to use the rubric to tabulate your final score, you got to hit that checkbox before anybody starts submitting assignments or whatever.
All right.
That was one of the quirkinesses.
In the last few minutes, are there any things that anybody is dying to highlight here?
Could you go to the,
Oh, yes, that's right.
because I wanted to show you guys something that changed my life.
All right.
Yeah. And
Where are we at? The very bottom?
I did that, yeah. So I used to have that thing, right?
Oh, that's right.
And it's a spreadsheet in numbers. But I found out that numbers comes with this incredible feature that if you scroll a little bit further down.
Yeah, so when you're talking about numbers, you're talking about Apple Mac numbers.
Right. So you can create something they call forms that looks like the one on the left. And the really neat thing about form is that since if you have an iPad or an iPhone, you can tap and fill those forms simply by tapping. So that
And it's
whole
interactive with
worksheet turn
4,
into that.
3, 1, 5, 2.
And you can have things like, the person doing this presentation agreed the class or not. Tap. You can, at the end, I was like, if we have time, this is the time to start, tap. This is the time to end, tap. It's within the limit. And it will do that just like that. And to create a form, the only thing you need to do is see on the right, left corner, there's a plus sign. You click on that plus sign, instead of a new sheet, you set new form. You tell it what form is associated with the sheet, and voila, you have those things, and they're fantastic.
Yeah, so this does not connect. Big caveat.
Right.
This does
This
not.
doesn't, it doesn't work with.
It does not connect to the Canvas grade book. But, so what you do afterwards is you have the thing at the bottom that tells you how much this is, and then you go in and you say, Ryan got a 67, Heidi got a whatever.
Yeah.
Around the room. So there is still some manual elements to it, but the ability to just kind of very quickly in the moment go in and make these notes can be very helpful. And I remember,
It's very unexpressive, that's what I like the best, you're just listening and
Miguel Garcia Gasalvas talks about using his iPad for these things because it has that same sort of ability in SpeedGrader to very quickly go through and hit next, hit next.
Yeah, I think the speed grader looks better on a tablet than on a desktop.
Yeah. Sorry.
What did you call it? The supporting students in the peer review process, the third tab from the right there. So I made this blog post that has kind of peer review guides to it, and there's a video in there linked for students that under resources to share with students. There's a KB doc with the video that shows the process of the peer review, and that can give you a good idea of what it looks like from the student's perspective.
Thank you for sharing that. That was really good.
Yeah. This whole, want to do a call out to this blog page. And they're doing a really good job of providing insightful insight to instructors about all kinds of stuff in Canvas. So it's a blog to follow, I think. All right, any last moment as we are winding down? Are we done? We're done. We're done. Thank you all for coming. And please do give us feedback. We will try to add extra things to the bottom of the activity sheet. You can also feel free to go in there, you have edit rights to go in and add your own ideas and thoughts below the now graphs that are there about numbers. And thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.